Welcome to the 7 Steps to a Bestseller webinar, sponsored by GoCo Publishing. I'm Bryan Heathman, president of Made for Success Publishing. Have you ever dreamed of becoming a New York Times best-selling author? Or have you ever wondered what it would be like to write a book and have it made into a major motion picture? If so, this training series for authors is for you. In my 10 years of publishing books, I've experienced some amazing highs with books, topping the lists of the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and creating #1 Amazon bestsellers. Yet, to my professional frustration, my own book, Conversion Marketing, has taught me some painful lessons. As a result of experiencing some amazing successes with the books that I've published and experiencing some dismal failures, I embarked on a quest to develop a reliable and repeatable process to generate best-selling books. In the next 45 minutes or so, I'll be walking through a fast-paced program designed to illustrate the 7 steps to writing a best-selling book. In this series, the Made for Success publishing team of designers, editors, and marketers has prepared some real-life case studies, stories, and statistics designed to help you create the next bestseller. Xerox, and then in the late 90s, I was I was working in the high-tech industry and became a dot-com pioneer, starting an online advertising agency, and ended up running hundreds and hundreds of marketing campaigns for some fairly large companies like Nissan Motors and Procter & Gamble and Travelocity, and came up with a body of knowledge that I felt compelled to share with the world. And that body of knowledge came out in the form of Conversion Marketing. And Conversion Marketing is a book all about how to convert a website visitor into a paying customer. And I came up with about 24 different scenarios that people can run on a website in order to get folks into their databases. So back in 2009, I was one of the real early pioneers in this whole realm of ebooks. So I was launching a catalog of ebooks. The first ebook that Made for Success Publishing launched was Conversion Marketing. We sort of cut our teeth on that book, and the book evidently caught the attention of some fairly interesting people, because one day I was sitting here at my office and my phone rings. I pick up the phone, and it was none other than an editor at Random House making an inbound call to the author, which virtually it very seldom happens. And they said, "Hey, we'd like to send you a contract and represent your book." So I said, "Well, that'd be fantastic. Go ahead and send your contract my way." So they did. They sent a contract my way, and I read the contract, and I thought, my goodness, who would sign this? Because effectively what it was doing is it was signing away the rights to all the intellectual property that I had in my 7 years of experience as a pioneer, and signing away the copyright. So what I set out to do with Made for Success Publishing was to create a company that would have agreements that I was comfortable signing as an author. And the agreement that was signed and the agreement that GoCo Publishing has put forward is the same agreement that I signed with my own book. What I didn't realize, though, at the time was what value the infrastructure behind a company like Random House could bring to the table. And I was presented with a bit of a conundrum, and I'm going to show you some numbers here in just a minute that I'm candidly a little bit embarrassed about. But this is one of the realities of writing a book, and this is one of the things that motivates me to teach the 7 steps to a bestseller, because unfortunately I did not adhere to all these elements, and these are things that I've learned through the School of Hard Knocks in coming up with this material. So I pulled these numbers this morning from Amazon.com, taking a look at just the ebook sales of my book, Conversion Marketing, over the last 90 days. And you can see these red blips that happen every now and then. And I think if you count them carefully, you'll see 1, 2, 3, 4 of those red blips. Well, now each one of those red blips represents a sale. And that means that a grand total of 4 ebooks have sold over the last 90 days. Now you can see why this information matters, because if you are skilled at putting a book together, you will have a much different result than the result that I'm seeing right now on my own book as a industry insider and an expert in this whole realm of publishing. Now, I wanted to illustrate another book, and this one is by an author. She's actually a very successful financial planner. Her name is Carrie Bruntz, and she came out with this book in the first quarter of 2015 called Hide and Seek. And she did everything right under our guidance. And when her book launched, you don't see those 4 little red blips with 1 ebook sold in each period. You actually see some pretty huge blips, like this first blip that you're looking at. That represents 20,000 units downloaded in one day. And this big drop off that you see is for 5,000 ebooks downloaded from Amazon in one day. And then the next day, we see about 3,500 ebooks that were downloaded in one day. So there's massive potential if somebody takes these 7 steps to heart and goes through and sees all 7 through. So I've worked on a number of #1 bestseller campaigns, and I really do have a good sense for what it takes to have a #1 bestseller in the marketplace. This one was for a campaign that was run several years ago for a motivational speaker who went under the moniker of Dr. Attitude. And let me tell you, this guy did have a lot of attitude. And he wrote this book, Connect. I was actually running the marketing campaign for this book, and we took this book to the #4 position on the New York Times bestseller list, #4 position as well on the Wall Street Journal bestseller list, and we took him to #1 in the category of motivation on Amazon.com. So that was a pretty big success, and these are the type of things that we'll be talking about here over the next few minutes. And hopefully for books that you've got planned coming up, or books that you've already published, with this information, you'll be able to see a much, much different result than what I saw with my own book, Conversion Marketing. So the 7 steps to a bestseller really do boil down to these 7 things. And we'll be talking about each one of these elements in a little bit more detail as we go into the meeting. And I'm definitely looking forward to sharing this information, because I do feel like this information will be to the betterment of authors all over the planet. And I feel really strongly about the success of books. And I feel really strongly about the success, after you've taken a year or 2 years, or for some people even 5 years to write your book, I think it's important that a book has its day in the sun and really gets a fair chance in this competitive business that we call books. I'd like to start the story with an international speaker. She actually lives in the United States, and today I received a messenger message from Facebook from her. She's actually touring Australia on a speaking tour this week, and she came to Made for Success Publishing with her first book. So she's a first-time author, and she had this intellectual property called the Top 7 Personality Challenges. And she came into me right after she finished writing the book, and she said, "Bryan," she goes, "what would happen if this book became a bestseller?" Now, being the expert in publishing, I looked her straight in the eye and said, "Dawn, listen, it's highly unlikely for a first-time author to come out with an international bestseller. And so there's other things that we should be worrying about or thinking about at this stage, and being a bestseller probably isn't one of them." But Dawn is very persistent. And she came back and she said, well, Bryan, she goes, what would happen if this book became a bestseller? And I came back to her a second time and said, listen, it's very unlikely that this book will become a bestseller. So let's set our sights in a realistic way. So she came back to me a third time and said, Bryan, what happens if this is a bestseller? And what happens after we launch this book? Well, it hits the #1 position in the iTunes audiobook store for over 11 weeks. And it held the #1 position in over a half a dozen countries for that period of time. It was absolutely staggering to me, the success that we saw. And Dawn sold a lot of ebooks out of this and a lot of audiobooks as a result of this campaign. And so part of the 7 secrets to a bestseller are the things that were learned when we wrote up the case study for Dawn Jones' runaway bestseller, The Top 7 Personality Challenges. So the first step in developing a bestseller is it's got to start with good writing. That's just a fundamental. And books are a funny thing. Did you know that most books are purchased based off of word of mouth advertising? In fact, in marketing circles, we call this a book going viral, or it's when one person reads the book and tells somebody else about the book. Well, about 82% of books are purchased off of word of mouth recommendation. So if you can think of the last book that you were compelled to go out and purchase, did somebody tell you about that book? I would say the odds are probably pretty high that somebody told you about that book or you saw some sort of a recommendation from friends. So a book doesn't get recommended unless the writing is great. So it's got to start with great writing. So for business books, there's a couple tips for you. So a great business book today will come in somewhere between 35,000 words. You see some big best-selling books on the New York Times bestseller list coming in at around 35 or 40,000 words. Other books like you might see from somebody like John Maxwell, they also hit #1 on the bestseller list. They'll come in at about 80,000 words. So as you're planning your writing and you're coming up with the word count, between 35 and 80,000 words is a pretty good number. Now, a second way to come up with really, really good books is having a critique group. So a critique group is a group of authors potentially that might get together and will actually offer critical feedback to the book. So that's kind of a clever way to get things done, and it is also a way to inform you in real time while you're writing. What are some of the things that you can do to improve your writing? Other things that people do, especially people like Dawn Jones that I mentioned earlier, she actually spoke her book. She went into a studio and did a studio recording of the book and then had that transcribed. So when she wrote her book, she got a 2-for-1 deal in that she got an audio book and a physical book and an ebook all at the same time when she wrote her book. So that was a pretty clever strategy for doing product development. One of the other things that Catherine offers with GoCo Publishing is the ability to do a manuscript review. We actually have editors that are standing by right now who will read your book and write a 2-page write-up about what they see with a professional eye on the writing. And that's a really valuable way to get some input on your book as well. But one of the things that's essential is a proofread of the book. And in fact, this book up here on the bookshelf is a good example. This book was written by a prolific speaker who speaks a little over 50 times a year. He lives in Malibu, California. He wrote a fabulous book called An Adventure into Your Mind. Well, this book went out onto the market. He had a family member who's got a PhD in English literature who did the proofreading of the book and sent us the manuscript insisting that it was clean and ready to go. Well, unfortunately, the book was not clean and ready to go, and we had an editor go through after the book was published, and they found 43 things that needed to get edited. So it's really important to have a proof editor go through a manuscript to make sure that your writing is good. And for all the books that are published with GoCo Publishing or Made for Success Publishing, we actually hire an editor to go through your manuscript because we want to make sure that your book is right and perfect when it goes out. Then we also have a number of different book derivatives. Now, if you're in a publisher's seat, you think of a book like a physical book, for instance, and that's the traditional book that you're accustomed to reading. The second type of popular book derivative is an e-book, and the e-book is things that people read either on their Kindle device, or I read my e-books right here off my phone. And then a third type of book derivative is a audiobook, and the audiobook can go out in digital form, or it can go out in a retail package configuration like this one for Beyond Survival by Captain Jerry Coffey. So those are just a couple things about setting up the book for success with good writing. Next, the next second most important thing for the 7 steps to a bestseller is coming up with a title that works. Now, titles are a tricky thing. It's not something that comes naturally or easy to a lot of people. In fact, when I develop a book title, I will get a team of about 3 people together to do a brainstorming session. We usually use a whiteboard to come up with ideas, but there's a couple tips and a couple principles that I wanted to share that make any book memorable. Now, you remember back what we talked about earlier in that 82% of books are recommended via word of mouth. Well, in order for a book to stick in somebody's mind, the title has to be memorable. So in order to keep it memorable, we like to keep the title relatively short. Between 3 to 5 words is optimal. In fact, a lot of modern publishers are even using one-word titles. And I jotted down just a couple samples of books that I've seen in recent years, like Dry or Me, or a 2-word title like Lean In has been very popular recently, or Outliers, or Tipping Point by Malcolm Gladwell. Those titles have all been very carefully crafted by a team of experts to keep the title short and memorable. Other ways to help people remember your book title is to use certain keywords. So if there's keywords that are specific to your industry, you might want to include those in your book title. Another way to come up with a memorable book is to use controversy. Now, I've got an interesting story about this. There's a author in my network whose name is Bill Perkins, and he's written over 20 books over his career. He's 65 years old, and his books have sold over 1 million copies. So he's a very experienced, extremely well-read author. And he came up with a new book for on the topic of marriage. And the topic was 8 ways to understand and meet the deepest needs of your wife. So the book was an interesting one, and he was trying to get a book that would launch strong, be very memorable, and then have evergreen product sales for the rest of the book. So he wanted to come up with a title that was controversial. Now, controversial titles work very well, and I'm a big believer in controversial titles. And I was very excited about this book when we first published it. But afterwards, I'm now embarrassed by this book, and we have to take the book off the market because we took the controversy just a little bit too far. So again, I'll tell you the title of the book. The book is about 8 ways to understand and meet the deepest needs of your wife. The book title that the author insisted we use was Why Naked Women Look So Good. He wanted to come up with something that was arresting, that would shock the mind and make it memorable. But what he didn't think about was, just the dynamics. If somebody buys a book and they take it up and they set it on the counter when they're making their purchase, and the title of the book would be rather embarrassing. Or if the man was reading the book and he's laying back in bed and his kids walk in the room and come up and see the title of the book that he's reading, that also would be fairly embarrassing. So these are the types of things that we learned when we were playing the controversy card. So controversy works, but we don't want to take it too far. Another tactic that works really well for a memorable book title are cliches. So you can use like a cliche, like a leap of faith or trial by fire, or you can leverage songs like Norwegian Wood or Dance with Me. Several very famous books have actually been lyrics of poems, such as Of Mice and Men, or Remembrance of Things Past, or For the Whom Bells, and A Passage to India. So all those came from poems. So these are all ways that you can keep your book title going. So just a couple tips for writing your title. Now, one thing that I do want to point out is you're looking at the picture here, the book market is fairly crowded. So coming up with a title that will stick out in a crowded marketplace is pretty important. So the third step to having a bestseller book, a best-selling book, is your cover artwork. And I've pulled an example from some of the books that we've published in the past. And it gets back to that old cliche that you can't judge a book by the cover. Well, unfortunately, in these days, that's just not true. People make snap judgments about whether even to check out a book by its cover. And the way we've actually done studies about the way that a consumer will buy a book. They'll pick up a book and they'll do what we call an eye sweep, where they start in the upper left-hand corner of the book, and then their eyes will sweep down to the lower right. And it's almost like a giant L-shaped. And they'll spend about 7 seconds looking at the front cover of a book before they make a decision to turn the book over and read the back, where they spend about another 30 seconds with the book. Now, in the case of this, we're working with an author who wrote a book about the Aztec Indians. It's a gripping story of an Aztec king who was embattled, and it's a love story. It's an action-packed war story, and the king's literal translation of his name, which is Aquetzotl, literally translates to water dog. So we first published this book under the title Water Dog, with a cover that the author felt very strongly about using, which was a Aztec calendar. Well, we did some testing of this, and we actually discovered that this cover wasn't playing well with our target audience. In fact, what we found is that a lot of people, when they were searching for the dog or for the book, they were confusing it with Labrador retrievers. So when you go on Google and you do a search on water dog, you'll actually find information about Labradors. So we actually re-characterized the book. We came up with a new cover that you see on the right, and we changed the title to Aquetzotl. It's a bit of a mouthful and it's tough to spell, but it's very descriptive of the content that's in the book. So of all the things, when you're looking at your book and the ideas that you've got, and you're looking at the cost that it takes to get a book to the market, if there's one thing that I would encourage you to pay serious attention to, it's the cover. And you typically get what you pay for with cover designers. And this is one area where you don't want to cut costs or cut corners. Now, the fourth element, which is a little known area of a book product, is the book description. And really, when somebody is making a buying decision, like I mentioned earlier, they're going to take 7 seconds looking at the front cover of your book, and then they'll flip the book around, and then they'll take about 30 seconds to read the descriptive elements on the back. And if they like what they see, then they take the book and they put it in their shopping cart. Now, that can also be in online catalogs as well. So with companies like Amazon.com, after the book has caught their interest with gripping cover art, then they'll go and read the description of the book. And that description needs to be very well written. And I've come up with just a couple tips for you to use when writing the description for your book. So one tip is to reference authoritative third parties. In fact, when Dawn Jones wrote the description for the top 7 personality challenges, she referenced Wikipedia as a authoritative third party, and she referenced Dale Carnegie's book, How to Make Friends and Influence People. So those are some ideas. A second idea for the perfect product description is to use some of the keywords. If you don't know what SEO stands for, that's a marketing term for search engine optimization. So you want to find out what keywords people are searching for your topic. A third element is a lot of people think that people buy books based on needs. But what our research has found is that people make buying decisions more based on their heart or based on desire. So it often makes sense to move then to number 4 and actually tell a story in your product description that evokes a desire. If you're writing a business book, the 5th element makes sense. That's where you can use statistics or facts. And this is obviously sometimes important for people making a buying decision. But number 6 is probably the most important element of all, and that's to create an emotion in your writing. And then finally, one of the modern tips is to do the formatting of your book in HTML so that when it appears in catalogs like Amazon.com, it looks exceptionally good with fonts and colors and other elements. So one question that just came in from folks, and in fact, if you want to ask questions in real time, there's a little chat feature that you can see where you can actually type a message and you can actually send me your questions here in real time. And one of the questions that Kathy just recently sent in was, if the book has a short title, should you have a subtitle? And the answer to that is absolutely. In fact, if you're using a short title like Lean In, it's very important to have a subtitle that actually fills in the gap, that describes kind of what the book is about. Is it about lean manufacturing? Is it about the physical act of leaning in? So those are the type of things that a subtitle does, and it usually goes in conjunction with the book title. The third thing that goes in conjunction is the imagery that we use on the front cover. So there's 3 things that work that make people make a buying decision: the title, the subtitle, and the cover artwork. And they usually go in that order of priority. Now, book pricing is another interesting thing. So being a publisher, and I was an economist in school, I love charts and graphs. And this is one that caught my attention. This is some research that was done just a while back on what is the perfect price in terms of sales volume and profits for an ebook. And I've got a couple charts here, but basically the optimum pricing for an ebook based on this research that was done, I'm just going to make this real quick, was about $3.99. And it's at that level where you sell the most volume of books, and you're earning the optimum amount of cash off each sale. Now, this slide actually gets into what we call a profit yield. So you're basically be able to see what pricing generates the most royalty earnings for you as an author. And again, the top position here was $3.99, and coming in at number 2 was $6.99. So as you're thinking about how do I price my book and the derivatives like an ebook, this type of research comes in pretty handy. But I actually have made kind of a science of pricing books. I've actually launched over 1,500 book derivatives in my career, so I've got to have a fairly good understanding of what prices are not too high, what prices are not too low, so that we can find that perfect sweet spot between profits and sales volume. And here's the recipe that we use. It's a 7-step formula for developing price for books. So the first thing that I take a look at is what is the fame level of the author. And the way we determine this, I do a little study. It's a branding index that I do for studies to figure out what kind of profile does an author have in social media circles, and what kind of profile do they have on websites like Google and on Amazon. And we can actually index and figure out what the fame level of an author is. The second thing that that we look at is the genre of the book. So is it a business book? Is it a cookbook? Is it even a children's book? And those type of things will help inform us as to what the perfect price point is. Another element, a third element, which will help support a high price are respectable reviews. Now, if you're a book trade insider, we all read certain publications like Publishers Weekly or Library Journal. And if we can get your book reviewed by those publications, which are read by the book publishing industry, then we can definitely charge a higher price because that book will be in demand. And similarly, we can also charge a higher price if your manuscript has won an award. So a typical good practice for a book is about 6 months. This sounds like an incredibly long time, but stick with me. But 6 months before your book launches, send a physical copy of your book. Yes, not a PDF, but a physical copy of your book to people who write award or who read books and issue awards, because if we can get things like an award on the front cover of your book, those will make a material difference in your sales and will allow us to support a higher price point. Now, we also take a look at the page count. If we're selling a very thin book, that will actually, like if it's a 120-page book, that will have a very small price point, or if we're doing a very thick book like Aquit Zodel, here, this book has 610 pages in it, so we can get a slightly higher price point for books with high page counts. The sixth thing that we take a look at is the marketing support. So some of our authors are actually hiring us to do a New York Times bestseller campaign. Other people are getting on morning talk shows, radio shows, television shows. People are getting articles in in-flight magazines. All those type of things will make a material difference in the word as it gets out. And if we've got a good, strong marketing program, we can actually do some increase in the price. And finally, probably one of the more interesting things is what type of strategy do we have to sell your book into major retailers? That's another factor. Now, I talked about marketing here just a second, and I'm actually reminded of a really good marketing program that I just saw like 2 or 3 days ago for an author that I know. His name is Jim Rupert, and I'm just going to take a second to pull up one of his videos. Now, this is a marketing tactic called a book trailer video, and what it is, it's just a very short 60-second but very cinematic overview of the book. Let me play that for you here and let you check it out. So as you can see, that tool, a book trailer video, can be a really effective way to market a book. I mean, it actually gets you excited about reading that book called Rooms. I've spent time with that author. He actually lives kind of near my hometown. He's a very, very interesting guy, a prolific writer. He's writing about one book a year, so that's fairly interesting. Now, before I roll on to social proof, I did get a question that just came in that I think is worth taking a couple seconds to talk about. Graham sent this question in. He said, in the past, having a physical book has added credibility and has made it easier to get mainstream media attention compared to just launching an ebook. And this, by the way, is a very good question. With all the changes in the marketplace, is it still worth the cost to have a physical version of the book available in traditional bookstores, or does it make more sense just to have an ebook? Well, Graham, when I launched my book in 2009, and we saw the ebook trajectory taking off like crazy, I thought it would make sense to just do the ebook and not go through all the expense of coming out with a physical book, because I also thought that the future of books was in ebooks. Well, the thing that we've noticed is that ebooks have now leveled off. And in fact, over the last 18 months, the sales of ebooks have actually started to decline relative to the total mix of physical books, ebooks, and audiobooks. Now, I don't have the statistics at the top of my mind, but for worldwide sales, but I know in the United States, 65% of all the dollars spent on books are still spent on the physical book. So if you're looking to use a book as a credibility piece, the physical book is still where it's at. It's where the money is in the marketplace. The ebook represents roughly about 27% of the mix, and audiobooks will range, depending on the audiobook, but it will range between anywhere from 1% to 11% of sales. So that just gives you a relative idea. Now, if you are using the book to generate credibility, which is what you mentioned in your post, having a copy of a physical book that you can send to a client becomes very important. In fact, I was just on the phone about an hour ago with a tennis pro. He's a professional tennis player that's written a book, and we were on the phone with Nike, who makes sporting attire and tennis shoes, and the tennis market is actually a very good market for them, as they sponsor some of the bigger players in tennis like Roger Federer and Serena Williams and Rafa Nadal. So we're talking about these players, and we're talking about the attire that they're wearing, and this author was trying to get speaking engagements through Nike in the tennis community. So he took his physical book, wrote a cover letter, and mailed it to the contact at Nike to help him remember and then also help him come back to hire him for speaking engagements. So the answer to your question is yes, a physical book is very important in establishing credibility as an author. And again, if anybody has any further questions, please feel free to send those in. Now, the sixth element of the 7 steps to a bestseller is social proof. And this has become more and more important just over recent years. In fact, in the last 5 years, it's become critically important. So when you're launching your book, you'll actually want to think through a strategy to get reviews for your book. And I've got 3 tips to share with you here. First is asking friends and family to review your book, and maybe even taking the price of your book or your ebook down to about 99 cents, encouraging people to purchase the ebook, read it, and then write a review. If you can get 20, 30 reviews doing that right off the bat, that will put you in a really good position. Other people that I know, they actually run campaigns. There's a famous speaker, his name is Brendan Bouchard, who did a campaign, and his campaign actually got over 500 reviews for his book in the first week that the book was launched. So that's very significant. And just recently, Dee Dee here in our office in Seattle has found several author groups on Facebook that will actually do an exchange, meaning I'll purchase your book for 99 cents, read it, and write a review if you'll purchase my book for 99 cents, read it, and write an honest review. So these are some ideas that you can use for getting reviews. And then finally, the seventh step of the bestseller strategy. So one thing that I learned was another painful lesson with my book, Conversion Marketing, in that the promise of the new printing technology, which we in the book printing industry call print on demand, I discovered that this model is broken. It's good in the fact that when you have a print on demand book, you no longer have to spend your hard earned cash printing inventories of books and having those books sit in a warehouse. Nor do you have to worry about shipping the books to a bookstore, having the bookstore sit on them for about 3 months, and then for any of the unsold inventory, the book comes back, gets shipped back. Those things can get very expensive. But what I discovered in 6 years of operating a business centered around print on demand is that this book business is pretty competitive. And when a book launches, it really does need to have what I call its day in the sun. And today, big bookstore chains like Barnes & Noble or Books A Million or airport gift shops or the big bookstores that are big store chains that are in Australia and the large independent bookstores that are in Brisbane and Melbourne and Sydney. Those are incredibly important to the success of a book. And having a salesperson go in and get your book placed in these markets is critically important. So second is to go ahead and do a marketing plan for your book. The retailers are going to have, they actually make their buying decisions based on the perceived strength of your marketing plan. So this is something that you want to take a look at. And folks like Catherine Owen actually have some tremendous ideas for you. She's actually running a marketing program right now for a local author in Sydney who has done an incredible has an incredible marketing launch strategy plan at a pretty affordable price. So she's got some really good ideas about what you can do in market to get awareness of your book. Another thing is printing support materials. So what a lot of authors will do is they'll print business cards or bookmarks or even mugs and that type of thing to support their book and give those away. T-shirts are also very effective in order to get awareness for your book. We talked about the importance of getting reviews, both in terms of professional reviews within the industry, and then we talked about winning awards. But the single most important thing here to keep in mind is that when your book does launch, you're going to need to work with a publisher who can get that book its day in the sun on bookshelves throughout, not only through Australia, but here in North America as well. The North American book market is gigantic. It's in the billions of dollars. And for every book that Catherine produces locally in Australia, we'll actually be distributing that book in the United States market as well. So that's one of the fairly unique things about working here. So working together. So we talked about the 7 steps to a bestseller. One thing that I do want to reiterate is that every book that is going to become a bestseller needs to incorporate all 7 of these requirements that we talked about. And I know that this is a lot to remember. We've actually gone through this information fairly quickly, but Catherine has been good enough to compile a white paper, and I'll talk about how you can actually get this white paper after the call here in just a few moments. One question that I saw that just came in was asking about what some of the book publishing packages that GoCo Publishing has to offer, and I did want to share that information here. So getting published, we've got a program called the Book Publishing Freedom Package. that includes getting your book published with an established publisher with retail sales support. Second is we've got this book publishing package freedom also includes a complete review of your manuscript to make sure that it doesn't have 43 typos in the first half of the book like this book unfortunately had. We make sure that the books are perfect before they go out. We'll also print and distribute both a physical copy of your book as well as the ebook version. The ebook version goes into every major ebook catalog, including Amazon, BarnesandNoble.com, iTunes, Kobo, and dozens and dozens and dozens, and even hundreds other ebook retailers. One of the bigger ones in your market is ebooks.com. It's a company that's based in Australia. We also will be marketing the book to our retail accounts. This is really important, and this is the reason why we're in this business. Like I mentioned earlier before, a lot of the things in the policies and the programs that we've put together have been to support books like conversion marketing. It's important to me that these books have their day in the sun. My book will actually be rolling out to the retail channel this January. So that's a very exciting development, and we'd be very excited about talking to you about your books as well. And then finally, getting some expert marketing advice is key. And Catherine is a great repository of knowledge and is eager to take your calls and your emails. I'd also encourage you to just send a chat with any of your questions that are developing here as we're starting to get wrapped up in this conference call. But one of the things that I would like to invite you to do next as you're thinking about any last-minute questions that you want to chat in is to send Catherine an email. And her email address is displayed on this next slide, which is catherine@goco.com.au, and send her the answer to these three questions. One, let her know if you started your manuscript. That's just a simple yes or no question. So you can just type in number one, yes or no. Two, if your book is complete, if you've completed your manuscript, let her know that, yep, my manuscript is complete. And the third element is, what is the theme of your book? So if you could follow up with those steps, in fact, if you are sitting at your computer and can open up your email client and send her that email right now, that would actually be extraordinarily helpful because she's actually standing by and she's got some interesting information that she'd like to share with you. And she can also kind of tell you what the exact next steps are, depending on where you are in this process. So that pretty much wraps up our call here, and I do want to thank you for taking your time. I know that you're incredibly busy, and you've probably got a lot of things on your mind as it relates to your book, but it's been a pleasure having you listening to the 7 Steps to a Bestseller webinar. I wish you great success with your book. Our motto at GoCo Publishing and Made for Success Publishing is you tell the story, and we tell the world. And we're excited to tell your story. Thanks again, and we'll be in touch.